All I needed was a release from my draft board, an exit and re-entry permit from the U.S. State and Justice Departments, a British visa, and some sort of passport to put the visa on. I couldn't afford to collect a no at the very beginning, so I needed an understanding ear. I was in trouble. Well, the United States was just starting to realize what trouble meant, but the British had been at war for over 2 years and must have got used to trouble. I decided to go to the British first. From Jansen's to the airline terminal was a 5-minute walk. I learned that there was a plane leaving for Washington in less than an hour. I bought a ticket, and Collier's was out still more money. 2.5 hours later, a taxi put me down at the British Embassy in Washington, where I asked to see the press attaché. I was led into the presence of a tweedy gentleman with a very red face and a bored expression. I told him my name, but I didn't know how to start my story, so I simply gave him the 2 letters, the one from Collier's, then the one from the Department of Justice. He read the first one without showing any reaction, but when he put down the second, there was a trace of a smile on his lips. Somewhat encouraged, I fished out and handed him the still unopened letter from Consolidated Edison, which I well knew was a notice that my electricity was going to be shut off. He motioned me to sit down. When he finally spoke, he was surprisingly human. Until the war, he had been a professor of geology. The outbreak of hostilities had found him in Mexico, where he was happily studying the composition of the soil on top of tired volcanoes. He did not care much about politics, but this was war, and they had drafted him as a press officer. Ever since, he had had to turn down all kinds of propositions for saving the British. He assured me that my case beat them all. I was champ. I was overwhelmed with sympathy for him and for myself. I suggested lunch. We went to the Carlton and had to drink many dry martinis before we could get a table. My companion warmed up considerably, and I began to feel that, along with Collier's, the attaché in the British Empire were going to be stuck with me too. When we finally got a table, I picked up the menu and ordered a dozen Blue Points apiece to start. Now, 5 years before, in France, I had invested heavily in my drinking education, and I remembered that in every English mystery story where Lord Peter Wimsey had anything to say, oysters are washed down with that marvelous white burgundy called Montrachet. The Montrachet 1921 was at the bottom of the list and very expensive. It was a happy choice. My companion told me that 15 years ago, when he had spent his honeymoon in France, he had impressed his bride with that very wine. So, by the end of the bottle, we were talking about our love for France and Montrachet. Over the second bottle, we agreed that our feelings about throwing the Germans out of La Belle France were equally strong, and after the coffee, along with the Carlos Primero brandy, I told him about my 3 years with the Republican Army in the Spanish Civil War, and how I had good reason to hate the fascists. Back at the embassy, he picked up the telephone and asked for the State Department. He got through to someone high up, called him by his first name, and said that in his office was good old Capa, that it was vitally important that I get to England, and that I would be over in 15 minutes to pick up my exit and re-entry permits. He hung up, gave me a slip of paper with a name on it, and 15 minutes later I was at the State Department. I was received by a precisely dressed gentleman who filled in my name and occupation on a form, signed it, and told me that all would be ready by 9 in the morning at the immigration office on Staten Island in New York Harbor. Then he accompanied me to the door, relaxed for a moment, slapped me on the back, winked, and wished me good luck. When I returned to the embassy, my friend the attaché was a bit solemn and worried, until I told him that my first step had been successful. This time he called the